minutes or so with your responses. I know that's not much. I'm gonna make sure everybody gets a chance to speak, everybody gets a chance to talk, and I'm sure the conversation will take off in different varying areas. And we'll be monitoring Twitter, and we'll be monitoring our little chat function here. And I think we're set from Josh's end too, it looks like. So, okay. All right. You recording? Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's go ahead and begin. The hour is now, and I wanted to go ahead and respect people's time. Welcome to North Park University's Center for Youth Ministry Studies webinar series. My name is Daniel White Hodge. I am the director for the center, and I also run the youth ministry major here. I'm on as well with our assistant director, Allison Burkhart. This is an ongoing series on a variety of topics that is designed to keep the youth worker, youth pastor, and youth advocate up to date and resourced with issues surrounding the broad topic of youth ministry and youth culture in the contemporary age. Today's webinar is a two-part series, okay? So today is the panel. So next Tuesday, September 9th, 2 p.m., we will discuss how we can engage these issues with our students and unpack some of the how-to conversations regarding racism, uprisings, police terrorism in a ministry setting. In other words, how does the gospel show up in tough times just like this? And so I'm hoping you guys can join us as well for that. You can log on to our website. We're at northpark.edu/centers/Center for Youth Ministry Studies, and we have a host of material and resources for you there. You can also download some of the archived webinars that are there as well. This one is going to be recorded. For today, we have a huge subject matter to cover, so thank you all again for joining in. Those of you who are live streaming, and I know there's probably different various places that people are logging in and whatnot, so thank you all for joining us. I'm going to assume that you want to learn more about this particular topic. To all of our panelists, which I'll go through and introduce here in a minute, I thank you as well for taking time out of your busy schedule and for being a part of this. So a few housekeeping matters, notes, and to keep in mind here moving forward. I just want to run through this and then we will begin. Number one, we will mute everyone who is not a panelist. This is going to help keep background noise down and keep the conversation moving. So don't be offended that you're muted. It's just a matter of just kind of keeping things moving, because when you're unmuted and there's anything in the background, your screen, your face would take precedent, and we don't want to distract from the conversation, at least not yet. You want to pose a question, either raise it in the chat box. There's a little chat box function there on WebEx as you're getting to know the WebEx software. Or if you are streaming now, you can hit the hashtag PIHS Ferguson. And that's on Twitter. And you can pose a question that way. And also, if you just like, I don't even know any of that, you can just go on Twitter, CYMS@NPU. And that's the @ is spelled out, AT. And we'll try and respond that way too. So there's a couple of varying ways that you can pose questions and be involved in the conversation. We are recording this event, which will be archived on our website. So if you don't want your voice to be heard for whatever reason, again, please note that what I just got to saying. You can go to the chat function. You can pose your question on Twitter. You can still join in the conversation, and again, using the methods above that I just described. We will attempt to leave some time at the end for some Q&A as well. But we have a large audience today and may end up only taking internet and chat room questions. Again, please don't be offended by that. We definitely want to get people in on these conversations, but we also want to keep the conversation moving as well. So without any further ado, I think we will go ahead and get started. Our panelists today, we have a wide range of folks and voices, and I'm so thankful to be on here. Again, I'm going to be moderating. We have some people in different various locations. We have Liz VerHage. She's on the West Coast. Efrem Smith, he's on the West Coast. We have Amy Williams here in Chicago. In fact, she's in the office right now. We have Brother Phil Jackson here in Chicago as well. He is doing some great work. We have my good friend and colleague, Dr. Soong-Chan Rah, who is in his office, and he has put out some good stuff on this material. Sandra Van Opstal, I apologize if I'm butchering her name. I know she's trying to still get on. Romal Tune was on, but he was trying to get some get on a plane, so I'm not sure if he's going to be able to join us. And I think Cecilia Williams might be joining us too from the Evangelical Covenant. Michael Novelli, who's trying to log on as well. Kathy Khang, I did see her face here a few minutes ago. She is on as well. And then I think Anthony Nocella as well, who's another youth advocate, is trying to log on. So let's just dive in. Let's go and let's just do this thing. Yeah. Let's start with our first question. What were your reactions to the death of Michael Brown? I'm going to start first with Liz VerHage. Liz, what was your reaction as when you heard about that?
We heard about it briefly the Saturday right after it happened. So we mentioned it just in prayer at church, but it was really the next week, when all the details came out, when the community was responding. I personally had a lot of anger and some disbelief, that this can still happen. But there was also a lot of empathy. There was calling mothers who have sons and talking with other young men of color who, sadly, as you know, this isn't a surprise for them. So the anger continued for a long time, but I'd say along with that, there was some grief and there was a lot of awareness that this was hitting very close to home for a lot of people.
Wow, let's keep going. Efrem.
Was, man, it was just a year ago that I found myself grieving after the George Zimmerman verdict connected to Trayvon Martin. And it felt like, though a year later I felt like I was experiencing healing in my own life, and that there were conversations that had developed that I realized that, one, there's still such a long way to go when it comes to how we see African American males, especially African American males in urban and under-resourced contexts. And my first reaction is we have a long way to go when it comes to dealing with race in a systemic and institutional manner. And so I was personally grieved, but also just reflecting on we still have such a long way to go around these critical issues, and that if there was ever a time for the church to be a reconciling force of kingdom compassion and justice and truth, now's that time.
Wow. Amy Williams?
I was personally grieved, but I think when it happened, I was more concerned about how young people felt about it and responded to it. I actually lost one of my students to kind of the same thing where a police officer killed him. He was unarmed. There was no reason for it. And so just kind of felt a bunch of emotions, but a lot of my young people, it kind of triggered them again. And then a lot of young people that I talked to about the subject were just kind of like, this always happens. When is it going to stop? And so I think there's just a kind of a wide range of emotions, but I think I was mostly concerned about how young people were going to respond and react to it.
Let's keep it going. Phil Jackson, brother, how did you respond to when you heard about Brother Brown being shot?
First of all, man, in Chicago, and kind of complimenting what's happening in Ferguson, we had some cops killing some students, which has been ridiculous, killing some young people. So I was heated already because of what's happening in Chicago. And then when I hear that, and then the whole ramifications of it, I had a chance to talk on Moody Radio of all stations, to talk about this thing and being able to kind of spark it. It just really pissed me off, because how is it that this young kid who's got no weapon, no AK-47, can get shot 6 times? My father was a cop, and when my father had to ever pull his gun out, it was always 2 times in the air, and then trying to cause a flesh wound or something. His theory was, let me wound you, so we could figure this out. I mean, if it came down to even him having to point it to somebody. So in the reality of his background and my raised by him, and understanding that it created this anger. I mean, I feel with the people of Ferguson. It's almost like a people who don't have a voice finally can be heard when they start burning stuff down, And so that anger around all of that kind of stuff is where I'm at with it. I mean, it seems like it's a ticking time bomb in America, even around this power struggle with the police and those who are suffering in the inner cities.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I just want to interject real quickly there, and as hopefully guys can see some of these PowerPoint shots as well, in regards to just some of the these are actually pictures that I got off the internet from Ferguson. But it's interesting to note just some of the differences and similarities, mainly the similarities from April 29th, 1992. For those of you who don't know that date, that was the date of the LA uprisings after the verdict of the Rodney King trial was heard. And I was an 18-year-old young man, and I was actually involved in the LA uprisings. And I call it uprisings because I didn't necessarily consider that rioting, because we knew exactly what we were doing. And that was the first time in my life that I was ready to die for two things in life, and that was equality and voice. And so I also want to point out these things don't just happen in a vacuum. But let's keep this moving. Let's keep this moving. Brother Rah, Soong-Chan, what was your reaction when you first heard about Mike Brown?
Well, I think a lot of us were feeling not again so soon after what happened with Trayvon Martin, just the feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. And Efrem said this earlier, we just still have such a long way to go, and that it would keep coming up over and over again. I think when I look at this whole thing, the tragedy is that we still don't learn from tragedy like this, that history keeps repeating itself. And I think there's a very profound historical failure of the church, of the country, to have to go several rounds of this over and over again. So some of the work that I've been working on recently, trying to understand how history does repeat itself unless we enter into lament and confession. And the question that came up with me was, what did we learn in the previous iterations of this? Of yet another black body on the ground, helpless, dead, not the way things are supposed to be in our world. So my question continues to be raised of, well, what have we learned from our history? And how are we continuing to revisit this issue over and over again? And what have we failed that we have to keep revisiting this issue over and over again?
Wow. Sandra, I'm going to come to you. I see you finally got a chance to log on, so that is great. Sandra, same question. Like, what was your response, initial response when you heard about the death of Mike Brown?
I hope you can hear me. Yes, Daniel?
Oh, all right. All right. I think, all right, we'll keep it going. We'll keep it going like radio. We're going to keep it going. Sandra, if you're on there, we'll definitely come back to you. Let me go to Brother Novelli. I see Novelli's on there.
Yes. Well, like my colleagues, my reaction was not again. That this can't be happening again, and I just felt a deep sadness that it takes such a tragic instance to bring these issues to the forefront, and a deep sadness for the friends and family and the people in that community who were personally affected. I think even beyond sadness, it rose up in me a heavy discontent with the systems and the thinking that continue to perpetuate this kind of injustice. I really, I just feel like this is an important time in our country to say no more of this.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate that. Kathy, let me go to Kathy here.
Unfortunately, I was not surprised. I don't know if that says more about me and my cynicism, but I think it was just a matter of figuring out how big this would become in terms of national news, or if it would die down like another bad season of shooting in Chicago. So as Twitter exploded, and it really wasn't the news cycle in traditional media, I was following the Twitter cycle, I felt a bit of a disconnect. I don't live in the city. I live in the north suburbs of Chicago, and it felt surreal to see people I would consider brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, and this situation not surprising me, but feeling like my community here could opt out of the conversation quite easily. So what I was feeling was, how do I make sure my family, my children, stay on top of the information and have the conversations that are important to have, because we still have a stake in what's going on in our church and in the broader community.
All right, I'm going to try to come back to Sandra here and see. Thank you, Kathy, by the way, and see what your reaction was. You're on too. We have unmuted you. There you go.
Great. I think my video's lagging, but it may be that I'm friends with Kathy, but I actually had the same response to that question. I wasn't surprised. I think I was numb, to be honest with you. We've had a very, very hard summer in Chicago here on the west side, northwest side, and we had just completed a series of Stop the Violence campaigns with our kids. We had, I think that week, there were a couple of very young kids shot in our neighborhood. And I think I was feeling numb to what I knew that was indicative of. It's not just our neighborhood, it's that there are systems at play, and I don't know, I felt numb. When I got angry was when I began to hear people engage the issue. Friends would blog or post just their lament, their feelings, their thoughts. And as I began to see comments rolling out from, I would say, Christians outside of this context as well as inside the context, I began to get angry at how I thought the church was questioning and engaging the situation. So at first, yeah, I think I just, what a hard summer, I was numb and I wasn't surprised. And then when I started seeing responses, I got angry.
Wow. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that anger and just and what that might look like, particularly the Christian response and just some of the media streaming and trolling in particular, how that has played out, particularly a response to police have a right to defend themselves and defend their life. What does that look like? Does a citizen have a right to defend themselves against terrorist police as well? And I'm using that language particularly because, yes, there are great police officers. I do believe that. I've worked with a lot of them over the course of my time. But I also found that there are also, in the same vein, a lot of officers that have used that power and actually tend to occupy neighborhoods. And so it's like Kamasi Brown said, it's like every day you're getting fed a spoonful of hatred, and that's your diet, a spoonful of hatred. And so this thing on Ferguson, when you uprise, that is the very last thing that you have that you feel like you can give is your life, your body when you uprise and stuff. And that when that hatred just builds up and spills out. So I want to talk about that anger, but let me go to Anthony. I see him online here. Anthony, question to you. How did you react to Brother Brown's his murder? And you are on right now, if you can hear me. Okay. All right. That's cool. We'll keep going. We'll come back to you, Anthony. Don't worry. All right. So let's go to maybe question, number 2. How are these issues that are happening in Ferguson, Missouri, not an isolated event for ethnic minority youth, especially Black youth? So I'm wanting to kind of ask that question and see. Let me start with Efrem. Efrem, brother, let me see what you think about this.
Well, I mean, that is a question that is so deeply rooted in cultural, racial perspective and experience, because I think that there is, to some degree, a majority or Anglo mindset to not connect dots when it comes to a situation like this, and to go case by case, situation by situation, because that's kind of a way of dealing with race as well. Like there are some people in dominant culture, and even some people that look like me, that have the position that we shouldn't talk about race from a systemic standpoint, but we should go person by person. Is this person racist? No, they're good. Is this person behaving like they're racist? No, they're good too. But you don't dismantle racism. You don't dismantle sin, even theologically, by just looking at an individual. In the Old Testament, God would look at a whole corporate, national, generation after generation context in judging the nation of Israel, let's say, in the Old Testament. He would say, this is your sin corporately. And so when it comes to this issue, my biblical theology is very similar in what I see in the Old and New Testament, that you can't just look at Mike Brown and Darren Wilson. You have to look at Emmett Till. You have to look at Oscar Grant out here in the Bay Area and the whole Fruitvale Station movie. You have to look at Trayvon Martin. You have to look at incidents that have happened in Chicago, all around the country, and ask yourself, is there a broader devaluing of the African American male? Is there a broader caricature of the urban black male that we have to deal with, that is deeply connected to institutions of power, that is deeply connected historically, that has to be talked about, grieved about, repented of, so that we can move forward? And if we treat this just as an isolated incident, as many people are right now, we will never truly solve these issues, and will unfortunately continue to lose way many more young men that look like me than needed.
Wow. Liz, let me come to you. Liz VerHage. Same question.
Am I on? Okay. Can you hear me?
Oh, Liz, you still with us?
Yeah, hold on. It's muting.
Sorry. All right. We will definitely keep it going. All right. Let me go to Kathy then. Kathy, what are your thoughts on that same question?
I'd have to agree with Efrem as well. And the slide that you have up on the screen from Newsweek, this Michael Brown was the straw that broke the camel's back. I find it interesting. So I started out as a journalist, and so I sometimes see it through those cycles. And what's so infuriating is that a year ago, we were talking about stand your ground laws. And it feels like a year ago, that was the issue. And the image was young men in hoodies trying to reclaim young Black manhood. And now, a year later, we're back to what I think is the same conversation, but portrayed differently, which is Michael Brown's body left for dead on the street for hours. So I think it's easy to disconnect and want to separate the issues by time, by news cycle, by communities, by laws, and by political issues. But the danger is that if we continue to do that as Christians, we kind of lose sight at the way God unfolds his story, the way God unfolds his plan, and how we enter into that place in time while connecting the past with the future. And I feel that frustration is that this isn't an isolated event for minority youth, especially Black youth. It can't be, because it keeps happening over and over and over. And to say that it's isolated ignores the fact that it repeats itself in similar fashion. And so unless we get to the hard conversations, the systemic issues, policy changes, and understanding history, I don't think we're going to be in a different place a year from now. I think it'll just be a different headline.
Wow, that's deep. Michael Novelli, brother. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that the core issue is that it's about the value of life. It's about being humane and how we value people, and it is rooted in history, and it is something that we have to learn from. But I think it's also rooted in this rugged individualism that keeps coming to the surface, that there's this self-sufficiency, this self-protective reality that's being constructed that's equated with success. And I think that rugged individualism is perpetuating this culture in the U.S. of suspicion. And we're seeing that swell, as we've seen it swell in previous generations, that you see people's deep-seated fear and racism surface when they're perceived that there's a threat. They're perceived that their rights might be taken away. I think you see this reflected also in the discussions about guns and the debate around guns. A lot of it's about protection, self-protection. And I think that's a theology. This theology of individualism and rightness is about protecting and defending what's mine. And that's not rooted in Jesus' kingdom ethic. It's not rooted in Jesus' way of sacrificial love and forgiveness. When we're always looking to preserve our own interests, we create this society that contrasts God's intentions. And so, this is rooted in an understanding of humanity that is about self-protection, and that's stunting us from becoming the kind of society that I think God would desire, and from being fully human, from walking in wholeness.
Wow, this is good. All right, well, let me come back to Anthony Nocella. I see him back on there. Brother Anthony, same thing, brother. What are your thoughts on this? And, what is it? Yeah.
Well, it's great to be here, and a lot of great voices. I'm assuming you can hear me and see me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So, I think the question that a lot of activists have, and, as myself, I'm an activist academic, is, it's great that there's this momentum going on today, but as, all the presenters kind of said, it happens on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis. And, I go into detention centers, on a weekly basis, on a volunteer with Save the Kids. So, I don't think, one thing is, I don't think we need more organizations, right? There's a lot of organizations out there that you can get involved in. So that would be the one thing to do. But for those people that are just getting involved and their consciousness is just kind of, a light bulb kind of went off, begin to listen and read, right? Don't believe, I see so many people, I know the answer, right? And I think the best thing to do is just kind of, listen, observe, and then take it all in and reflect. And reflecting and listening is very difficult because we're not taught that in any of our educational experiences, right? Maybe in our spiritual and in church and spiritual centers, but for the most part in society, we're not taught to listen. We're taught to speak and act, and that's an effective individual. So, so my third suggestion is, whatever your feeling is, do it, in a matter of speaking, right? So if it's going outside and yelling, go outside and yell. If it's holding a banner over a bridge, go ahead and hold a banner over a bridge. This is not the time to tell another person what to do and how to express themselves. People are mourning, people are angry, people are sad, happy, frustrated, whatever they are. And when I say happy, I believe that there is some joy, in feeling empowered. And I think, people are feeling that they can make change. And the sad part is that it has to happen, not because of Michael Brown, but the hundreds of small, young, beautiful children that have been executed at the hands of other adults or police. And that needs to be to speak to, what are we going to do in a year from now? Are we going to be Skyping about this on another issue or another person. I think we are. So I think, you know, again, mobilize on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and as Daniel and so many other people do, we're not doing this for money. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. So, you know, please participate. You can, you know, contact me via text or phone, savethekidsgroup.org. But, you know, those are a few of my thoughts. I think the one, you know, I work with a lot of organizers there and nationally, and I think people are trying to, you know, tell another person what to do and what not to do. And I think that's the worst thing that we can do right now. Just do what you feel is right. Hopefully it's constructive. Hopefully it's nonviolent. But today, maybe 3 hours ago, they closed down the highway in Ferguson, right? I'm sure you all know about that. You know, I saw a lot of hate messages on Twitter about it. What's the point of it? Or was it constructive? It was just, you know, to say that business is not usual, right? We're not going to keep on doing this. But, yeah, that would be my short summary.
No, thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Now, let me move on. So this is good. We're going to get into the depth of this here. All right. There we go. Okay. So the next question I want to ask is, what does it mean to you to hear that Black lives do not matter in the U.S.? I might not affect Asians, Latinos, Native Americans, Euro-Americans, and/or Middle Eastern people. How has the U.S. shown distance towards Black in this country? And I particularly want to start with Amy, and I want to come to you, Bill, particularly as it relates to that question, because I think that we've heard this over and over and over, and of course, pushback is that, well, this is only one life. You know, what about the thousands that have been killed in, for example, say, Palestine, or what's happening right now in the Middle East? So why should we be concerned about one life? Amy, we're going to go to you.
I think during this whole thing, the most disturbing thing to me has been conversations that have been around, well, he was a thug, and he robbed a store, and he did all of these other things that make it okay that what happened to him was necessary or what, again, was okay. And I think that is the narrative, that is the story, that is what our young people of color continually hear. This isn't the first time that our young people have heard this. This is something that we see, and it's absolutely reflected in what's happening in our prison systems, what's happening as they're shutting down schools. Which schools are they shutting down? Which schools are they investing in? This isn't something that our young people have just heard. This is something that our country has been saying to us since, and I always say I believe Columbus was the biggest gang out there, that people of color, that their lives do not have as much value or worth. And you see it when you're doing ministry, you see it when you're trying to encourage our young people. And what makes it difficult is when our young people come against all of these systemic things that are holding them back, and they're trying to press through, you're trying to help them to stay encouraged and be accountable, and then bam, something like this happens again. And so I'm most disturbed and broken by how the conversation has been built around, well, he was a thug, so he kind of deserves that. And I could go on and on, I'm going to let Phil bring it in here.
Oh, go ahead, Phil.
Oh, no. I agree. I think, I don't know, man, the whole thing, to me, it goes back, you know, to the people and giving the people a voice, right? And we got a situation with a police officer now who's harassing different leaders in the neighborhood who are trying to empower the community. It goes, you know, the people in the neighborhood who are already disenfranchised, whether it's a white cop or black cop or Latino cop, it's about power, right? And so there's a powerlessness there that that I think those overseas, others who are fighting various other kind of situations, it's that struggle of that power. And the church, especially in the city, right? We got 187 churches in North Lawndale, which should exemplify some kind of power towards righteousness, towards change, right? And so the frustrating piece is that power is muted, that power is limited, or that power begins to be watered down and diluted. You know, we have to do an array of different things. I think it's the marches, it's the political voice. We're having this meeting this week, in the next 2 weeks, with all the police officers we can and all the residents we can here at the firehouse, have this peace circle so that we can be at least on a proactive end trying to prevent some stuff jumping off. You know what I'm saying? So taking the power back is what I want to see happen, especially amongst those who seem to have a sense of powerlessness. There was a great movie, you all probably saw it, Michael Moore, Sicko, right? And he interviewed this prime minister dude, and the prime minister said, anytime you can keep people unemployed, broke, you can keep them uneducated, and you can keep them sick with poor health care, you have power over them because they will never protest or they'll never come at you. And so oftentimes in the city, that powerlessness kind of happens because of those areas. I don't know what to do. So some of our efforts, you know, trying to help people who feel powerless to have power against the powers that be, to speak truth to power. Police come and try to harass kids in the neighborhood, and we say, look, they can't frisk you unless they got something. They can only ask you for your ID. And when the kids mount up the courage to say, hey, you can only ask me for my ID, the police really pull back. And then these aha moments that these kids say, yo, I do have this power. But it takes a lot of courage to mount up that strength to do that amongst those who seem to have abused that power for so long. That's just my bottled up frustration with all of that piece. That those who are powerless have the power to make the change. You just got to let them loose.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate that. Liz VerHage, let me ask you the same thing. Liz, you on, sister. Hit it.
Well, you know, this question about how is what happened to Mike Brown not out of the ordinary, I think that we've been kind of living there the past month in our context. We're a multicultural church, right? And we're in the Pacific Northwest where, I think to put it nicely, being African American can be very hostile out here. It's very different. I was in Chicago for many years, totally different history, different story. So I feel like our job has been, a portion of our church is living this day to day. They don't have to be taught this history or, you know, awakened to grief. They have this deep, sometimes sharp, sometimes angry well of emotions and experiences. And Mike Brown could be them. It could be their kid. It could be their dad. But in the same church, we have a lot of white Americans and Asian Americans from kind of Pan-Asian backgrounds who may not get that this is not just an isolated event. So I feel like our job has been twofold. It's kind of holding the anger for those who get this and are enraged, holding that and not kind of tamping it down. I think there are times that anger is discipleship and it's righteous, and the only, I think, biblical response to death and violence is anger. That's a very legitimate one. But carrying that alongside folks who are still, even maybe really well-meaning, saying, you know, understand that this was so personal and so often, is in a different context where, you know, maybe wait for all the facts. We've heard that from folks here. Or we'll wait till we really see what happened. Not understanding how those responses in themselves are so aggravating and difficult, and it just shows, you know, you haven't had to wrestle them with the systems that caused it. So it's a lot of work to kind of go forward and go back, check in with everyone and do that. But I think that in the multicultural context, that's our work, is saying, how do you hold up righteous anger and lament and grief? But how do you also educate and equip people who this is not their life, they don't know it, without over-spiritualizing it? That's what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Liz. Let me hop to Sandra, and then I'm going to hop over to Soong-Chan Rah as well. But Sandra, let me start with you with this particular question here.
Yeah, I think going back to the question that we were talking about earlier about it not being an isolated incident, I think in a context I'm in, which is the neighborhood is Black-Brown, and there may be relocators or friends or people on Facebook or kind of my extended community that adds to that, as Liz said. that come from different communities. Sometimes, as someone who's worked in ministry in an academic setting, I love information. So trying to convince people with statistics and with pictures, and but it can oftentimes create distance from the human element of what's happening. So I was thinking a lot about, like, why are people thinking this is an isolated incident, regardless of their background or culture? And I thought to myself, part of it has to do with there's no human connection or relational connection to what's happening. Whereas those of us that may live in these neighborhoods or know and be friends with people have an opportunity to hear the stories, to know what's happening, and to pay attention to how these experiences affect people's identity and how they create systems that are not isolated. And then that moves to the question of, when you hear Black lives don't matter in the U.S., how does it affect other ethnic minorities? Well, I think it has two results. Number one, I think those of us that have experienced racism and discrimination because of our background would say, well, we don't think brown lives matter either in the U.S. And I don't think you need to go very far to watch the news and find out what's happening at the border with unaccompanied minors, with refugee issues, to know that there is a scale of whose lives matter in this country and whose lives don't matter. And so we would be empathetic to that. Yeah, Black lives don't matter. We see that. We see that brown lives don't matter either. Our kids are getting shot, and actually it's being hidden in the news by, the statistics that Chicago is a safer city right now. I think the second response is that if we come from communities that immigrated to this country, we're asked to drink the Kool-Aid of the community that we are, forced to assimilate to. So if you come from a place and you come into a community or a culture, and there's clearly a scale of whose lives matter and whose lives don't, then you get placed somewhere in that scale. And that's a very confusing and painful and complex reality that I don't think our current conversations handle well. So being someone who's connecting to our congregation and our youth as a local pastor, I'm oftentimes hearing things on both ends. Yeah, Sandra, Black lives don't matter. Brown lives don't matter either. And then on the other end, the same kind of questioning and suspicion that you would hear in a white suburban community, because they're trying to make sense of where their place in all this is. So I think that the statement Black lives do not matter in the U.S. Affects other minority communities very deeply, and it's a very confusing process.
Wow. Oh, this is good. This is good. All right, this is getting deeper, and I've just put some questions up here. I'm going to go to Brother Soong-Chan here in a second. I just want you guys to kind of, as you're processing this, because there are some vile comments going on right now throughout Twitter and Facebook in regards to anything. I mean, there's a whole fund. I mean, I'm forgetting what the number is. I think it was approaching $1 million for the police officer, and a large share of that was coming from the Klan and coming from some of these, white supremacist groups. And so that's the extreme, right? Like, most of us don't have to interact with that. But how do you interact with a friend who says, well, he shouldn't have been doing what he was doing. The guy had just robbed a store. So how do you, Brown was a thug. More evidence is needed. Supporters of Darren Wilson. Police have to protect themselves. You had a police officer who he was put on administrative leave, but he was one of the ones who pushed one of the reporters. But he has a long history. I mean, he even said it. He said, I like diversity. I'll kill anybody. And so if you step to me, I will kill you. So how do we deal with this guy in that phase? So Soong-Chan, shed some light on this, brother.
Well, I think one of the issues that have come up repeatedly is this issue of how we view others and how we view each other. And you're kind of alluding to it, Dan, about how we have, there were some assumptions made about Mike Brown, and that came out a lot in the media and social media. And I go back to some of this historical reflection that says, what have we created in the minds of Christians and Americans of how we view the Black male and African Americans? when you look at that long history, you see over and over again the creation of the black male as and the image of the black male as a threat. And so we operate kind of context and assumption. And what that leads to is a very, very deep rooted, deep-seated context of anger and violence. So if you think, for example, about in the media, what is the most significant image of the criminal? It is the unidentified black male. And so when we have the unidentified black male consistently lead the 6 o'clock news as the most violent, as the most defensive, that raises your defenses, those things get internalized. And so people are responding out of that kind of assumption of the unidentified black male as the most violent criminal. And so people are going to this new knee-jerk reaction of where does that criminalization of blackness come from? The automatic assumption that Mike Brown is a criminal. The automatic assumption that Mike Brown is considered guilty even before any kind of reflection on what's happening. And so my question then is, whose gaze is determinative and whose ideas of otherness becomes the norm by which we all respond to? And so the gaze of the dominant culture that says Mike Brown is a criminal, the gaze that says Mike Brown is violent and deserved X type of behavior, that's the systemic issue that has to be addressed. Whose ideas? And this is where we get to a very tricky issue of white supremacy. The assumption of white supremacy, the assumption of the black male as violent, the assumption of the black male as a threat, these are the structural systemic issues that have to be addressed. Otherwise, we will be back on this panel 6 months from now, once again talking about a yet another black male that's been killed and whether that was justified or not. All of these things will come up again unless we deal with the systemic structure of whose gaze is determinative, whose point of view is determinative. My perspective is that it is oftentimes the white supremacy that says the black male is this and the white male is this, and we end up having these discussions over and over again.
Wow. All right. This is going good. I'm going to come here to Amy. I'm just going to start kind of going down this list here. How might you respond? And feel free to add some things on here. But Amy, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't even know which one to pick. I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine on Facebook where, being a white male, he said that I personally am keeping racism alive by continually talking about it or posting videos or sharing statistics and facts. And, my response to him was, yes, this one video is keeping racism alive. I'm really continually bothered by conversations that do not validate the experiences and stories of what is happening to people of color in this country. And so when I hear things like, he was a thug, race isn't an issue, rioting is senseless violence, which, we all have our opinions about that, but it's still the voice and the story and the experiences of many. And so I also am challenged with the fact that this police officer, God loves him too, right? God loved Mike Brown. God loved everybody that's a part of this equation and this situation. And so then how do we as a church approach it in a way to say that these experiences, everything that is happening is very valid on both sides of the story? And I guess being biracial, being black and white myself, I'm constantly in that flux of, my people are doing this to my people. But one of the larger pieces for me would be to continually listen, to continually validate, and move the conversation forward really by listening to these experiences.
Wow. This is, I mean, and I think listening is a big part of it. I had a brief email conversation. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to put any names out there. Just having a brief email conversation with a friend, and that did come up. That came up about just not the cross-examination, if you will, of particularly an ethnic minority's voice. Well, that didn't really happen, or that didn't happen this way, or, you must have been resisting arrest. And, in a very comedic way, Richard Pryor used to say that, it's dang like, how many times is an officer's gun going to lose control? It's like, well, yeah, officer, the gun fell out of my holster and it just went off and shot the black guy 15 times in the back. It's like, are we going to continue to believe that? Are we going to continue to engage in that? And so, what is that listening, particularly by, I think Soong-Chan put it well, by dominant culture? How will you listen to somebody who says, this happened? I just posted a new video from some brother, African-American brother who got hemmed up in Minneapolis, in the Skyway. I mean, it is brutal to hear this, but it's so powerful, right? But then people are still saying, yeah, but I think we need more evidence. I'm like, what more evidence do you need? So, Brother Efrem, you've been silent for a while, so I want to come to you and get your take on this as well.
Well, a few things real briefly. One is, look, I'd be the first to say that as a high admirer of Martin Luther King Jr., I would rather see nonviolent, peaceful protests in Ferguson and in any city. I would be a proponent of someone that would not want to see, rioting, something violent, something destructive. At the same time, though, I have to say, it's funny to me that predominantly white colleges tear up their towns after a football game, but then we criticize African American people for tearing up their town after something like the death of Michael Brown. So, it's like you can go to any major college campus in America, and they're going to riot and tear up the city after a football game, after a hockey game. People tear up their town and burn stuff when LeBron James leaves their team, and then when he comes back to their team, then they're all happy and they want to buy his jersey. So, you do have something in the dominant culture where they tear up and burn stuff over something really superficial, like a football game. But yet, if we, after voting, after lovingly, nonviolently stating our case, we still see no justice, it's the reason why you see the rioting, which is why I tend to tell people, there are some people that think I'm radical and controversial. And I say, I'm the black person you really want to deal with, because there's another black person behind me you probably don't want to. So, I tell evangelicals all the time, I'm evangelical, I'm pietous, I'm Christian. I'm really the black guy you would want to negotiate with to figure out the most nonviolent, prayerful way to get to a reconciling, Christ-centered solution to the race dilemma in America. I think the other thing, real quick, is that we have to really dive into how is it that in predominantly white upper class communities, we find a different way besides killing a young man to deal with a crime, to deal with suspicion. So a guy that looks like the Joker can go into a movie theater and shoot up people, but he was able to get out of the theater and actually have his day in court. There are in suburban upper class neighborhoods, people can eat people. I mean, like, that's a real story. Like, Jeffrey Dahmer ate people, but he found his day in court after he ate people. But a young black guy who steals, $30 worth of cigars can't find his day in court. But if you're white and you shoot up everybody in a school, or you shoot up everybody in a movie theater, somehow you're subdued, put in the back of a police car, taken to jail, and the justice system takes its course. When that doesn't happen for African Americans, we question the system. And so, unfortunately, we live in a time where there's a dividing line, where you have some people of all races that are fighting for kingdom biblical justice, and others who say they're Christian, but they fight to protect institutions. And this is the final thing I'll say on this, because I want to stay in my time limit, is I would think my Calvinist brothers and sisters would get this, because Calvinists assume that everybody's depraved, wicked, evil, messed up. So this should be a no-brainer for Calvinists. They should look at the police force and say they're depraved. They're wicked, just like any other human being, just like any other human institution. So I'm not sure how, on one hand, Calvinists that are evangelical can think that all of humanity is wicked, sinful, depraved, without Jesus, without the kingdom of God, but then flip the script and fight to protect those same depraved, sinful, wicked, fallen institutions if they have a badge.
Wow. Wow, man. All right, man. Well, that's good stuff right there. I got so much going on, and obviously this panel gets us all thinking about, hopefully thinking about different things. But I want to start closing this up and thinking theologically. So I pose the question here, theologically, how do you respond to these issues? How do we help our youth begin a change in all of this? Where do you see embedded theology and or cognitive dissonance? I know those are big college words, but we got to throw them out there, right? Playing out in the broader nation's reaction to this. We aren't asking you to speak for people groups you don't represent, but think about this. But where do you see it playing out? And I want to go to Allison Burkhart, who actually posed this question. I think it's a very deep question to pose, so I want to go to her right now and have her kind of talk a little bit about this and respond to this, and have her just begin this kind of this finalizing, concluding discussion here. Allison?
So what made me even bring this up is just in preparation for this panel and looking at questions that we were posing, and just thinking about how, depending on where we're from, culture can mean so many different things. I'm a Caucasian, born and raised in rural Midwest America, which actually has a lot of Southern tendencies. So how does embedded theology, how do our embedded prejudices come into these conversations? And one way that I see it happening, particularly for people who look like me, and particularly from my source of context, rural, small town community, is that anything in support of Mike Brown and his family and those that are lamenting his loss, that any sort of support of that or allying of that is automatically anti-police. I've actually had some trolling on my Facebook page with that exact challenge, I guess is the phrase I'm looking for, where I was accused of being anti-police, this, that, and the other, when what I'm really doing is trying to listen to stories like Amy was sharing and validate and affirm experiences of friends of mine and trying to listen. So how can we, as say for me, an ally, I'm not African American, I'm not a person of color, how can I, as an ally, work with kids, work with families, or even just with other youth workers on how to have some of these conversations where this embedded theology, these embedded cultural prejudices are coming into play?
Well, that's what's up. That's what's up. So with this in mind, let me go to Liz real quick, and then I'm going to go to Sandra, and then we'll kind of try to get this and wrap it. I know the hour is here, so you guys are going to have to be quick on yours.
I think for a lot of white Americans, the challenge, as we've kind of mentioned earlier, is that they experience life differently. And the temptation for a lot of white folks is to think their perspective is normal, or it's the only perspective. And to be honest, this is why I have hope in the church, but I really don't have a whole lot of hope for racial righteousness and reconciliation outside of the church. I'm not sure why folks with privilege or with power would look at that, would turn their gaze inward and examine their own context, their own blinders, unless you're in the church. I think the promise, I mean, the church is messy. It's got all its issues and flaws, to be sure. But I think the promise in the church is we're calling people to think about the other and to actually intentionally pay attention to how you enter the world, how the world responds to you. Our church did a lot around grieving Michael Brown as family. And we would even say, you know, if you hear that someone's mom died of lung cancer, this was in Dr. Brenda Seltzer McNeil's sermon, so I'll give her cred. But like if you hear that someone's mother died, you don't say, oh, well, did your mom smoke a lot? Is that why she died? You first engage it as a friend, as a co-laborer, and you say, oh my gosh, you must be hurting, no matter how she died. I think for a lot of white Americans, it is the relational one-on-one that actually needs to enter us into other people's stories so that we understand white is not normal. It just feels that way because of privilege. And then after that, there's a whole, I mean, you all know, there's a whole journey and a host of responses and ways to be accountable and using the privilege and that accountability for others. But I think first you have to even wake up and understand the way you're seeing this is not the only legit way.
Let me hop real quick over to Kathy. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but let me just hop over to Kathy real quick. Your response to this as well.
What Liz just said about entering into others' stories, I think is very difficult as an Asian American woman to kind of, in a lot of ways, feeling outside of this particular event, but so frustrated because that is the privilege of majority white culture, because that has always been the story. And so I feel like even in part of this panel is we're trying to explain why Michael Brown, why this incident, why the rioting and uprising matters. It's part of the story. It's part of the American story. It's part of the U.S. Church's story. And I think theologically, when we say we value the other as the church in the U.S., we need to be very careful in understanding, are we saying that people who live amongst us are the other? So do we believe that the Black community is the other, the Asian American community is the other, the Latino community is the other, and that the white community is the center? Because when we talk about kind of this sense of otherness, I think that many of us on this panel have experienced that. And so maybe that is where I enter in, is theologically, I have heard that as the church, we need to welcome the stranger. I'm tired of being the stranger, and I cannot imagine what it is like for my Black brothers and sisters to be the stranger here in this country. And so I respond that way. What do we mean when we say the church is to love the other? We can't even love each other because we've already labeled one another as the other. And so what do we mean by valuing life, valuing one another, welcoming the stranger? I think our individual churches as well as our corporate church here in the U.S. needs to really wrestle with that line of theology so that we stop digging our heels into these individual stories.
Well, thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Well, again, I'm gonna try to get through most folks here. And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm trying to be respectful of time. Let me go to Anthony real quick. Anthony, 1 minute. Your response. 1 minute. Keep I know you can preach, brother. But keep 1 minute, brother. 1 minute.
So what I would say is, for, as a white person, I would say, let's make ourselves a little bit uncomfortable and take some risks. So I think we need to start, not doing things when we can, but doing things when we have to. And if that means giving up some of our jobs and taking, getting out of certain spaces, not always asking, can we be part of this? Can we co-sponsor this? And then just, not being involved. And I don't think it's always prevalent, because I hear it, too often, and then I'll stop right here, is that so many white activists say, do you mind, to a person of color or African American organizing around Ferguson or whatever, Trayvon, do you mind if I'm involved in the organizing of this? If you weren't asked, you probably were not, invited. And I think don't put the responsibility and the power of that uncomfortable decision onto the people that didn't invite you in the first place. So if they invited you, then that's most likely to say that you're wanted there. If they didn't invite you, you're not most likely wanted or needed there. And it's hard for white people to understand that you're not always needed or wanted, but you have to. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Anthony. Sandra, real quick, one minute, you two. We're winding it down.
Hey, I would say two things I was thinking about while I was watching all the blogs and the articles and the news. One was, it doesn't take a theologian or a sociologist to see what's happening in the streets. It just takes an observant neighbor. So how do we create congregations of observant neighbors where we're paying attention to what's happening around us and we're asking questions about why we keep seeing the same things over and over? And we're asking the people that it's happening to. So as much as I love reading from the news, I need to be asking my neighbor who has these experiences, well, what do you make of this? You're 17. How did you respond to the situation that happened? This is your peer group. So I think we need to listen to the streets. I think we need to stop having conversations at a level that doesn't include the voices that are experiencing the suffering and the trauma day to day. I had one pastor ask me, how much more are you asking us to take on, Sandra? Because I got a church full of people that are hopeless and can't cry one more tear this summer. So how do we preach hope? How do we listen to the streets and then preach hope into that instead of just assuming that we're only speaking to one audience when we're engaging the issue of microphone?
Thank you so much. Phil Jackson, brother. Well, 1 minute. What you got, man? What are your thoughts on this as we're concluding up?
Well, I'm grateful for everybody's insight and wisdom. I believe that there is so much more power within the people where the problem is at than outside of that. So I think it's always key to grasp and get a hold of the people who are being abused or the power that's being taken from them and find out from them, how do we change this? How do we flip this around? And oftentimes it is those who are the powerless or those who are disenfranchised who have to be the ones to come to those in power to create the bridge, right? And that sometimes is the challenge of those people who've been beat down so much to willingly come and be a bridge to make it happen. But I believe we need to tap into that source, and churches need to be able to go where nobody wants to go. I mean, being able to create a space where these conversations can take place and be bold about it. Pre-situations, right? Pre-conflict, where we can be proactive in that. So that's my encouragement. That's my challenge.
Thank you, Phil. This is good. This is good stuff. I'm glad we're recording this. All right, brother Novelli, where are you at, man? One minute. Let's go.
I think the only hope is to see others through Jesus' eyes. Jesus lived from this posture of radical compassion. He didn't live from a posture of suspicion. And so we're to reach out to those that are marginalized. Central to Jesus' ethic was to speak out against these oppressive systemic structures of his day. And that's central to us. That's what we do as the body of Christ. And I think that starts with listening, to listen with empathy and embrace the multitude of voices that are crying out about these continual injustices. Every day, people of color are being mistreated and marginalized in big and small ways. And they're being marginalized by those in power. And it's never justified. To be the body of Jesus means to stand with those who are oppressed.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Like I said, I'm glad we recorded this. All right, brother Rod, Soong-Chan, what you got, man?
Well, I would say that what we're talking about is a very important theological ecclesial project, and that project is to deal with white supremacy, so that we are uncovering white supremacy and addressing it so that these kinds of incidents are not the norm. And right now, it feels like it's the norm. So how do we begin to dismantle white supremacy? How do we begin to dismantle it through the church and through our theology? I think we've got to know our history. We've got to know the reality. We've got to enter into confession and lament, which puts us into a posture of humility rather than one of arrogance. And I think a lot of what our reaction is oftentimes, what we see on Facebook and social media, is an arrogance to say, well, I don't need to change what I'm thinking. I don't need to learn beyond what I know. And so how do we deal with this? We do it through the confession and lament that calls for humility. And then I'll say, as part of the theological project, we need to affirm God in all cultures so that we are not going to a de facto white supremacy, but we are calling and finding God is present in all communities and in all cultures. And that's why I think that in order to do this, we need to address some of the lies of something like colorblind ministry. The colorblind approach is a subtle form of white supremacy because it assumes that there is a norm that is out there, and we move towards that norm by putting aside our own cultural values. And so I think this colorblind approach to ministry dismantles and undermines what we're trying to do when we talk about maybe a more reconciled community. So how are we able to dismantle white supremacy, and how are we a part of that ecclesial-theological project?
Thank you, Brother Rah. Thank you. This is good stuff. This is good stuff. All right, Brother Efrem Smith, what you got, brother? What you got, man? One minute as we sum up here.
Well, I think that as disappointing and grieved, that we should be as the church over this. This is an opportune time for God's church. This is an opportune time for brothers and sisters across ethnicity, across race, across culture and class to truly be about the kingdom of God, which includes evangelism and discipleship, but also the witness shown through kingdom, compassion, mercy, and justice. And it's also a time I would really encourage Christian brothers and sisters to yet again reflect upon how deeply the church, as Soong-Chan Rah talks about in his book, The Next Evangelicalism, the church is held captive. It is enslaved to issues of race, of divisive politics and ideology. And if we can recognize that, repent of it, and then charge ourselves to be about what Christ calls us to be about in the scriptures, we have an opportunity to make a difference and not see another summer, another fall go by losing so many young black men to violence, whether it's at the hand of the police or by people that look just like them.
Thank you, Brother Efrem. Thank you, Brother Efrem. All right, Amy, bring it. What you got?
So I think that I always go back to the place of validating people's stories and listening to their stories. I believe that Jesus probably could relate more to Mike Brown than he could to the police officer if we look at the stories that we're going through. And if we really look at Christ's journey, we see how he validated and affirmed and made people that society said weren't of worth, he made sure that they knew that they were of worth. And so I think we need to continue to have the conversation, but it needs to be an open conversation. We need to stay in the posture of being a learner and really pay attention to the ways that we are communicating these messages to our young people. And I love, and I say again what Soong-Chan Rah is, that we have to affirm God in all cultures. God wasn't, Jesus wasn't white, he was American. Listen to the stories, validate people and their worth. And that's kind of summary.
Thank you. Allison?
So I'm going to speak from the place in closing as an ally and to people who look like me that are doing youth work. And just recently there was a Facebook post of an article, I don't recall where it was from, talking about how, and Amy reminded me of this morning, that 75% of Caucasians don't have any friends that are not Caucasian. that's a place to start if you're going to listen and affirm stories and to know more about the world than just your piece of the pie, so to speak. How we do that has to be carefully done. It can't just be in a, I was joking with Dan, I'm about to make a very white reference, but that Seinfeld episode where George Costanza goes and finds like the exterminator that's African-American, proved to his boss that he's got black friends. That's not how we do it. A place to enter is just by saying, I'm going to enter into a community that doesn't look like mine, and I'm going to visit, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to hear. I'm going to see God in this place. I'm going to see how God's been working in this place. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. And then we'll be, Dan, I know we'll share more about this, but next week on Tuesday, we're going to talk more specifically about how do you unpack these types of things with students. So with a multicultural ministry, with a all one culture, one color, one ethnicity ministry, we're going to talk about how to specifically unpack this stuff. So stay tuned.
Indeed, indeed. All right, so I want to leave us with a few things. A new research, the study was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and it sought to examine the extent which the racial biases exist and how significant the consequences are. Researchers reviewed police officers' personnel records to determine use of force while on duty and found that those who dehumanized blacks were more likely to have use of force against a black child in custody than officers who did not dehumanize blacks. The study described use of force as a takedown or wrist lock, kicking or punching, striking with a blunt object, using a police dog, restraint or hobbling, or using tear gas, electric shock, or killing. Only dehumanizing and not police officers' prejudice against blacks, conscious or not, was linked to violent encounters with black children in custody, according to this study. As a black male in the country, I don't think I needed a study to tell me that, but at the same time, we have some serious things, y'all, to wrestle with. If you're out there streaming, I know a lot of us got questions, and I want to spark the conversation. Allison is right. Next week, September 9th, 2 p.m., part 2 to this seminar. Log on and let's have this conversation, talk about some of the practical things. How do you build a ministry around this? How do you begin to show the gospel to somebody who says, hey, man, nonviolence doesn't work for people of color. It works for the dominant culture, you know, when they want to run into Iraq or they want to run into another country or whatever, but it does not work for us. The only person doing nonviolence are people of color. And so how do you deal with somebody like that? How do you engage that? I can share a little bit about my own experiences, 22 years ago, in Los Angeles, as a young black male, in being mistreated by the police. Again, when you uprise, there is a swelling of issues and whatnot. So I want to leave you with some of those things to think about and grind on. That there are no simple answers. There's no 5-step theory process that if you just do these 5 things, all of a sudden you become non-whatever, non-racist or we're going to be friends with the police. I think we have a lot of work we need to do with our police brothers and sisters that are on the force, and we also have a lot of work to do just in our community. First and foremost, I want to thank the panelists for taking their time out today and for sharing your insight, your voice. I want to thank those of you who have logged in either by phone or if you're streaming this or if you're listening to it on the archive right now. Thank you for chiming in. I encourage you to press forward, ask those questions. If you are part of the dominant culture in society, listen to what people of color are talking about. Listen to what those who have stories. I know some of them are real hard to believe, but as they said in The Color of Fear, what is keeping you from believing that this is actually happening to somebody? And what if, without rationalizing and putting all the stats, what if this were happening to somebody right now in this day and age? What would that mean for you? Think about that, particularly those of you who are in dominant society, dominant culture, those of you who are white. Think about that a little bit. Again, thank you for joining us. Blessings on all of us. I wish you the best, and hopefully we don't have to keep talking about this, like Brother Ross said, in 6 more months. We can begin to show some movement. Take care and continue to press forward. Peace, y'all.